Winter came early that year, covering Seattle in a quiet blanket of snow. The world looked peaceful, but inside the small house, everything felt uncertain. Since that night in Michael's room, Sarah and her father had spoken gently but less often. They moved through the days carefully, like two people walking on thin ice. Their bond was still there, strong, loving, but now surrounded by silence. Each knew things could never be the same again. Michael spent more time at his workshop, and Sarah began helping him less. She said she needed to focus on job applications, but the truth was, she needed space to think. The emotions she once tried to understand had softened into sadness, and she didn't know what to do with it. Sometimes she would stand by the window and watch the snow fall, remembering all the quiet moments that had changed her life. She loved her father deeply, but she now understood that some love wasn't meant to stay close. It was meant to teach, to heal, and then to let go. One evening, Michael came home late, snow melting on his jacket. "You're still awake?" he asked gently. Sarah smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep," he nodded, setting down his keys. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "Maybe it's time I sell this house. Move somewhere smaller, closer to work. It's too big for one person now." The words hit her harder than she expected. This house was full of memories, her childhood laughter, her mother's voice, her father's quiet strength. But she saw in his eyes that he needed a fresh start. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. They stood there for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the old clock. "You should start your own life too," he said gently. "You've spent enough time worrying about me." "I'm not ready to leave," she admitted, her voice trembling. He smiled, though his eyes looked sad. "You'll never really leave. You'll just move forward." That night, Sarah sat alone in her room, surrounded by boxes of old things she had started packing. She found a picture of the three of them, her mother, and Michael, taken years ago at the beach. They were smiling, happy, untouched by time. She touched the edges of the photo and whispered, "We were so full of hope." Tears welled up, but she let them fall quietly. A few days later, she helped him clean out the attic. They sorted through boxes filled with books, old clothes, and memories neither had touched in years. Every item carried a story, one that made them smile or fall silent. When Sarah found her mother's wedding dress folded neatly in a box, she froze. "Do you want to keep this?" she asked. Michael looked at it for a long time before shaking his head. "No, some things belong to the past." His words were calm, but she saw the pain in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "You did your best, Dad," she whispered. He didn't answer, but he squeezed her hand gently, the way he used to when she was little. Over the next few weeks, the house began to empty. The walls that once held laughter and silence alike now echoed with memories. Sarah found herself sitting in her childhood room one last time, tracing her fingers along the windowsill. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and steady. The night before she was supposed to leave for a new apartment she had found in the city, she and her father sat together by the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, casting warm light across the room. For once, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. "Do you remember when you taught me to ride a bike?" Sarah asked suddenly. Michael smiled. "You fell 3 times before you stopped crying," she laughed. "You kept running beside me, even when I told you to let go." "I didn't want you to fall," he said quietly. "You had to let go, though," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." There was a pause, long and tender. Sarah looked at him, her heart full of love and gratitude. "You've always been everything to me," she said. "You still are. And you always will be," he replied softly. For the first time, neither of them felt the need to hide their emotions. There was no confusion now, only understanding. Their love had changed. It had grown wiser, steadier. It was no longer tangled with guilt or longing. It was simply love, the kind that endures even when people go separate ways. The next morning, Sarah loaded her last box into her car. The air was crisp and bright. Michael stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets, smiling proudly but with tears in his eyes. She walked up to him and hugged him tightly, her arms wrapped around him like she never wanted to let go. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," she said softly. "I will," he whispered. "You too." When she finally stepped back, they looked at each other for a long moment, both smiling through their tears. "Goodbye, Dad," she said. "Goodbye, sweetheart." Sarah got into her car, took a deep breath, and started the engine. As she drove away, the house grew smaller in her rearview mirror, until it disappeared completely. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. She realized she wasn't losing him. She was carrying him with her, in every lesson, every memory, every quiet moment of strength. Back at the house, Michael stood by the window, watching the snow fall. For the first time in years, he let himself cry, not from sadness, but from pride. His daughter had grown into someone brave enough to face her heart and let it heal. Later that night, he sat by the fireplace again, the room quiet but warm. He thought about the years they had shared, the laughter, the heartbreak, the silence. He realized that love doesn't always need to be spoken to be real. Sometimes it simply lives in the space between people, shaping their lives in quiet ways. Across town, Sarah unpacked her boxes in her new apartment. She placed the old family photo on her desk, smiling at the faces frozen in time. The ache in her heart was still there, but softer now. She whispered, "Thank you, Dad," and turned off the light. Outside, the snow kept falling, endless and calm. Two souls, one father, one daughter, looked at the same sky from different places, both at peace. They had learned that love, no matter how complicated, was never wrong when it came from a place of care. And though their paths had finally separated, their hearts would always know the way back home. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees outside their Seattle home in shades of orange and gold. The air turned crisp and the evenings grew shorter. Sarah started spending more time at her father's furniture shop. At first she said it was to help him, but deep down, she knew it was because she wanted to be near him. Michael didn't argue. He seemed quietly grateful to have her around, though he rarely said it aloud. Working together brought back a sense of closeness that both had missed for years. They talked more, laughed occasionally, and found comfort in the rhythm of shared work. Michael showed her how to sand wood evenly, how to apply varnish in smooth strokes. Sometimes their hands brushed when they reached for the same tool. Each time, Sarah felt her breath catch, and Michael would step away, pretending not to notice. One afternoon, as they closed the shop, Sarah found an old family photo on the counter. Her mother stood between them, smiling brightly. "She looked so happy here," Sarah said quietly. Michael nodded, his face unreadable. She was, before everything changed. Sarah wanted to ask what had really happened between them, but something in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she whispered, "You still miss her, don't you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I miss the family we were," he said softly. Then, trying to smile, he added, "But I'm thankful I still have you." Those words should have comforted her, but instead they made her heart ache. She wanted to say she missed him too, not the father he used to be, but the man sitting in front of her now. But she stayed silent. The words felt too heavy, too dangerous. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of wind outside. Her thoughts wandered back to the shop, to his hands guiding hers, to the way his voice softened when he said her name. She hated herself for feeling this way, but she couldn't deny it anymore. She loved him in a way that went beyond daughterly affection. It wasn't physical or wrong. It was something deeper, emotional, confusing. It was love tangled with gratitude and loneliness, a feeling that made her both happy and guilty. The next morning, she tried to act normal. She made breakfast, teased him about his old coffee mug, and smiled like everything was fine. Michael, meanwhile, felt the shift too. He didn't know what to call it, only that he was afraid of it. Every time Sarah looked at him with those thoughtful eyes, something inside him stirred. Something that reminded him of being loved, of being needed. He told himself it was just fatherly pride, but deep down, he knew it was more complicated than that. One Sunday, they decided to visit the lake they used to go to when she was little. The drive was quiet but peaceful. The trees along the road shimmered with autumn light. When they reached the lake, the air was cool and still. They sat by the water, watching the ripples move across the surface. "It feels smaller," Sarah said. Michael smiled faintly. "You just grew up," she laughed softly. "I guess so." There was a long pause. Sarah turned to him. "Dad, are you happy?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "I've learned to live with what I have. Happiness isn't something I chase anymore." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "You deserve to be happy," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, everything else faded. The lake, the wind, the years of silence. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small, gentle gesture that made her heart race. "So do you," he said softly. Neither of them spoke after that. The air felt heavy with things they couldn't say. When they finally drove home, the silence between them was filled with more emotion than words could hold. That evening, Sarah went to her room early, but she couldn't sleep. She walked to the window, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess the feelings she didn't understand, but fear held her back. What would he think of her? Would he send her away? Would he look at her differently forever? Downstairs, Michael sat alone by the fireplace. He stared into the flames, lost in thought. He felt the same confusion, the same guilt. He knew how much she had filled the emptiness in his life, but he also knew he couldn't let the lines blur. She was his daughter, his family, and he would rather break his own heart than let her carry that burden. The next day at the shop, things felt different. They still worked side by side, but there was tension in every quiet glance. At one point, Sarah accidentally dropped a brush, and when Michael bent to pick it up, their hands met again. This time, neither moved right away. For a heartbeat, they both froze, caught between love and fear. Then Michael stood quickly and stepped back. "We should finish up," he said, his voice unsteady. Sarah nodded, her face pale. The moment had passed, but it changed everything. That night, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She walked to his room, hesitated at the door, then knocked softly. "Come in," his voice said from inside. She stepped in and found him reading by the window. "Dad," she started, her voice shaking. "Can we talk?" He closed the book slowly. "Of course." She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. The words tangled in her throat. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, I feel like I've lost control of my heart. I don't understand what's happening to me." Michael looked at her, his expression calm but pained. He stood up and walked toward her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You've been lonely," he said softly. "We both have. Sometimes loneliness confuses the heart, but it's okay, Sarah. You don't have to feel ashamed of love. Love, in its purest form, is never wrong." She nodded, tears falling silently. "I just want things to go back to normal." "They will," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're young. You'll find your own life, your own love, and I'll always be here when you need me. But as your father..." Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him that no one could ever replace him, but she saw the pain in his eyes and stopped herself. She nodded again, wiping her tears. "Okay," she whispered. Michael pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. It was a father's embrace, steady, safe, full of love, but it also carried the quiet ache of what they could never say. When she finally stepped back, both of them knew something had changed forever. That night, neither slept. Sarah lay in bed thinking of his words. She understood now that some love was meant to stay unspoken, not because it was wrong, but because it was too deep to be understood. Downstairs, Michael sat by the fire again, watching the flames fade into ash. He whispered to himself, "She'll be okay," though his heart wasn't sure he believed it. And so, the confession that never came hung between them, unspoken, unresolved, but real. It was love shaped by time, by loss, by loneliness. The kind of love that lived quietly in the shadows, asking for nothing but to be remembered. The first few weeks after Sarah returned home passed quietly. She and her father slipped into a gentle routine, moving around each other with the politeness of strangers sharing a house. They spoke when necessary, about groceries, work, and small household repairs, but never about emotions. The silence between them wasn't cold, only careful, as if both feared breaking something fragile. Michael often came home late from his workshop, his hands rough, and his shirt smelling faintly of wood and varnish. Sarah would wait for him with dinner ready, pretending it was out of habit, not longing. He would thank her softly, his voice always kind, but distant. When their eyes met, something unspoken lingered there, a strange tenderness mixed with restraint. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah followed him to the workshop downtown. The place was small but warm, filled with sawdust, tools, and half-finished furniture. She hadn't been there since she was a child. "I could help you," she offered. Michael looked surprised but nodded. She tied her hair back and picked up a brush, helping him paint the edges of a wooden cabinet. As they worked, their hands brushed once, just for a second. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. Michael didn't look up, but his hand trembled slightly. Neither said a word. The moment passed, but it left a trace, something neither of them could fully shake off. In the evenings, they began to share small moments again. Sometimes Michael would tell her stories from when she was little, how she used to sing off-key while helping him fix things, or how she'd fall asleep with a book in her lap. Sarah laughed, but her chest ached hearing those memories. She wished she could go back to when things were simple, before she understood how complicated love could become. One night, rain poured outside while they sat near the fireplace. Sarah made hot chocolate, and Michael sat across from her reading a book. The firelight flickered across his face, softening his features. For a moment, he didn't look like her father. He looked like someone she could talk to about anything. She wanted to tell him about her heartbreaks, her fears, her confusion, but the words stayed trapped. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Michael lowered his book slowly. "Your mother?" he asked. She nodded. He looked at the fire for a long time before answering. "Every day," he said finally, "but I learned to stop waiting for her." Sarah studied him quietly. His voice was calm, but his eyes told a different story, one of old wounds that never truly healed. She wanted to comfort him, but all she managed was a quiet, "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to be. None of it was your fault." The conversation ended there, but it lingered in both of their minds. Sarah realized she didn't just pity him. She admired him, his patience, his quiet strength, the way he carried pain without letting it destroy him. And sometimes that admiration felt too close to something else. Days passed. Sarah began to notice the small things, how his eyes softened when he looked at her, how his voice grew gentle when he said her name. She knew it wasn't wrong to love him. He was her father, but sometimes her heart didn't understand boundaries as clearly as her mind did. One morning, she made him breakfast before work. He walked into the kitchen, surprised. "You didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to," she replied simply. He smiled, sitting across from her. The sunlight filtered through the window, lighting the space between them. For a few moments, it felt like family again, peaceful and whole. But then their eyes met, and suddenly it didn't feel simple anymore. Michael cleared his throat and changed the subject. He told her about a client, about work deadlines, anything to shift the feeling that had settled in. Sarah played along, pretending she didn't notice the hesitation in his voice. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying every small look, every half smile. She wasn't sure what was happening, only that it scared her. She wanted to be close to him, to understand him, but she didn't want to cross a line she couldn't uncross. The next day, she found him outside, fixing the garden fence. She joined him without asking. They worked in silence, the soft wind brushing past them. When a plank slipped, she reached to steady it at the same moment he did. Their hands touched again, longer this time, Michael looked at her, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. There was confusion there, and warmth, and something they both wished they didn't feel. He pulled his hand back quickly and muttered, "Be careful." Sarah nodded, pretending to focus on the fence, but her mind was racing. She told herself she was imagining things, that loneliness made people see what wasn't there. Still, the air between them felt heavier with every passing day. That evening, she went to her old friend Emily's house for coffee. Emily asked how it felt being back home. Sarah hesitated before saying, "It's strange, like I'm living with someone I love but can't reach anymore." Emily smiled sadly. Parents and kids grow apart. It happens. Sarah nodded, but the ache in her chest deepened. It wasn't just distance. It was something deeper she couldn't admit. When she returned home that night, the house was dark except for a dim light in the living room. Michael had fallen asleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest. Sarah watched him for a moment, the way his face softened in sleep, the quiet rise and fall of his breathing. He looked peaceful, and she felt something inside her break a little. She wanted to sit beside him, to hold his hand the way she used to when she was small. But she didn't. She turned off the lamp gently and walked upstairs. In her room, she stood by the window, watching the rain again. The reflection in the glass showed a young woman torn between love and restraint. She knew she couldn't keep feeling this way. He was her father, the man who had given up everything for her. But no matter how much she reminded herself of that truth, her heart refused to listen. Downstairs, Michael stirred in his sleep. He dreamed of the past, of the laughter they used to share, of the warmth their home once held. He didn't know how to bridge the distance now. All he knew was that when Sarah looked at him, something inside him softened, and it scared him more than anything. Both father and daughter lay awake that night, each battling their own heart. Neither of them had done anything wrong, yet both carried a quiet guilt they couldn't name. They loved each other deeply, purely, but there was something else beneath it, something fragile and forbidden, built not on desire, but on the ache of years apart and the comfort of being seen again. The distance between them was growing, yet it also pulled them closer. It was the kind of tension that no words could fix, and as days turned into nights, both knew something had to change, before the silence broke them completely. Sarah hadn't seen her father in 3 years. After graduating from college, she told herself she needed time to figure out her life. But deep down she knew she had also been running, from memories, from silence, from the strange distance that had grown between her and the man who raised her. When her mother left years ago, their home turned into a quiet place where love still lived, but hidden behind walls neither of them could climb. Now, at 22, Sarah stood in front of that same wooden house in Seattle, suitcase in hand, unsure if she was ready to go back inside. Michael opened the door before she could knock. He looked older than she remembered, his hair more silver, his shoulders slightly bent. But his eyes, those calm, kind eyes, were still the same. "You're home," he said softly. It was a simple sentence, but it hit her harder than any long speech could. She smiled, trying to hold back tears, and stepped into the house. The familiar scent of coffee and old books wrapped around her. Everything looked the same. The worn couch, the ticking clock, the photos on the wall. But everything felt different. There was an emptiness between the furniture, a silence that seemed to have its own weight. Michael carried her bags upstairs, asking about her job search, her friends, anything that sounded normal. Sarah answered politely, though part of her wanted to ask the questions that mattered. "Do you still think about Mom? And are you lonely?" But she couldn't. She had forgotten how to talk to him about anything real. That evening, they ate dinner at the same small table they'd used since she was a child. Michael cooked pasta, the way he always did when he wanted things to feel normal. They talked about the weather and the new neighbors. Every word felt careful, as if both were afraid to say too much. After dinner, Sarah offered to wash the dishes, and Michael quietly agreed. As she stood at the sink, watching him read the newspaper from his old armchair, she felt something twist inside her chest, something she couldn't name. He looked lonely, but peaceful, like someone who had accepted a quiet life. She didn't know if that made her sad or jealous. Later that night, Sarah unpacked her things in her old room. Her childhood posters were gone, replaced by blank walls. She sat on her bed, tracing her fingers across the old quilt her mother made years ago. Memories returned. The fights, the tears, her mother walking out the door while Michael stood frozen, trying to hold himself together for his daughter. Sarah remembered hugging him that night, promising she'd never leave him. But promises made by children are often broken by time. She lay back, staring at the ceiling. From downstairs, she could hear faint music playing, one of her father's old records. It was the same song he used to hum when she was a child, when life still felt warm and simple. She listened quietly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. The next morning, she woke up early to the smell of coffee. Michael was already in the kitchen, reading emails on his laptop. He greeted her with a quiet smile and poured her a cup. "You've always liked it black," he said. She nodded, surprised he remembered. They sat together, sipping coffee in silence, the sound of rain against the window filling the space between them. After breakfast, Sarah walked around the backyard, remembering how she used to chase fireflies there as a little girl. The swing her father built still hung from the old oak tree, though it creaked now with age. She pushed it gently, watching it sway back and forth. It felt strange, coming back to a place that hadn't changed, while she had changed completely. Michael joined her outside, his hands in his pockets. "The tree's still strong," he said almost to himself. She nodded, glancing at him. The wind lifted his hair slightly, and for a moment, he didn't look like her father. He just looked like a man who had lived through too much. She felt a sudden ache, a pull she didn't understand. Maybe it was just sympathy. Maybe it was something deeper, something she didn't want to name. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to settle in. She cleaned her old room, helped with groceries, and even joined Michael on errands. He worked as a carpenter, running a small furniture shop downtown. He was good with his hands, quiet and patient, the kind of man who built things not just out of wood, but out of love and endurance. Watching him work reminded Sarah of all the times he had stayed up late fixing her broken toys, even when he was exhausted from his job. But the more time she spent around him, the harder it became to keep her emotions straight. He was kind, gentle, and funny in a quiet way. When he smiled, something warm spread through her chest. It confused her. She told herself it was gratitude, that she was just happy to be close to him again. But sometimes her heart raced for no reason. She hated herself for it, for even thinking that way about her own father. But emotions don't always follow rules. One night they sat together in the living room watching an old movie. The room glowed softly from the fireplace. Sarah leaned back against the couch, stealing glances at her father. His face was calm, his eyes fixed on the screen. When he laughed, she felt something stir again, a mix of comfort and guilt. She quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the film. After the movie ended, Michael stood up and stretched. "It's late," he said with a smile. "You should get some rest." She nodded, returning his smile, though her chest felt heavy. When she reached her room, she shut the door and pressed her back against it, her heart beating too fast. She didn't understand what was happening to her. Downstairs, Michael poured himself another cup of coffee, though he knew he wouldn't drink it. He had noticed the small things too, the way Sarah looked at him sometimes, the way her laughter filled the house again. It made him happy, but it also scared him. She was his daughter, the one person he had promised to protect. Yet he couldn't deny that the bond between them had grown complicated since she'd returned. That night, they both lay awake in their separate rooms, listening to the same rain. Neither spoke, but both felt the same quiet storm building inside their hearts. A storm made of love, loneliness, and the fear of what those feelings might mean. For the first time in years, the empty house wasn't silent anymore. It was alive again, filled with warmth, confusion, and the kind of emotions that change people forever. And though neither of them could say it out loud, both knew that something had begun the moment Sarah came home.